And welcome, everybody, to another amazing week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Very excited to be with you guys. Of course, took off last week just because it was the 4th of July. A lot of festivities going on. Happy 250th. Of course, to America. Hopefully you guys got out there, got to celebrate that, got to do something, right? Maybe in parades and fireworks and all those things, all good things, and all things that really lead us to celebrate all the great things about America. And as much as I talk about issues going on right here in the state, as much as I discuss those things, we do always should take a second to thank God and thank the fact this great nation exists that gives us the ability to even talk about these things. There's other countries where you're not allowed to even discuss the dear rulers. Of course, here in this state, I've had my own issues, continue to have my own issues of being punished by the government for speaking my mind, but those are ongoing lawsuits, and we have the opportunity at least to try to find some justice there versus, once again, in other places that would be more of a feature and not as much a bug. So, of course, we want to say happy 250 to everybody. Hopefully you had a great 4th of July over the weekend. But we do have a lot to talk about. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the federal Supreme Court, but there's actually a lot going on with our courts here in Kentucky that is worth discussing. There's some major decisions coming out. And then on top of that, certainly some let's call it legal corruption going on, perhaps, or activities that could definitely corrupt and change how maybe a judge or two would rule on things depending on who they are. So we'll discuss all of that. Before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure you leave a review. If you're listening on the podcast format, if you're listening on radio or TV, you can head over to theandrewshow.com and see all the places where you can listen to the show to make sure you never miss an episode, of course. But yeah, make sure you are leaving a review, subscribing. I know I say it every time, but doing so really helps us out and helps keep the show growing as much as it has been. We'd love it to grow even more. So please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So, a lot of people, this is what's funny. So, whenever I talk about things going on within the state, I always get a lot of people mouthing off about things going on at the federal level. I'll talk about perhaps what looks like some legal corruption going on within our justice system of Beshear throwing some fundraisers for people and so on and so forth. And individuals will always respond because they think it's a great you gotcha of, well, have you looked at what's going on in the federal government? Have you looked at our Supreme Court? Have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? First off, comparing our judicial system to the Supreme Court within the state is silly kind of to do because, of course, all the judges at the federal level are appointed versus the judges here in Kentucky are all elected, which, as we're going to discuss today, can lead to some interesting opportunities for outcomes that could be affected based upon the behavior of elected officials, specifically on the fundraising side of things. Because anytime you have an election, you have to have money to power that election. You have to have money to do ads. You have to have money to get out there and talk to people and spread your word and get people to vote for you. And anytime you're introducing that, you get some interesting controversial situations, especially when the people who are offering that money are people who are before your court rather often. We saw a recent story coming out from Judicial Watchdog Group calling out Beshear on some of those activities. But on top of that, with the Supreme Court, by the way, in their recent rulings, we've had a few state Supreme Court rulings that have really had some large and overreaching, not just effects on laws, but also it leaves me with a lot of questions here. So to essentially lay it out, so there was a few different bills that the legislature has filed that takes appointment powers away from the governor and moves them on to other members of the executive branch. And this is really key because the legislature knew that if they give themselves powers over executive branch boards, that the Supreme Court knock it down right away because, of course, the legislature is not allowed to, appoint boards that they created. And that's the other part. That's a little bit crazy here as we dig into some of these stories, because we're going to talk about both the executive branch ethics commission, and also talk about, of course, the Fair Board. A lot going on there. But what's interesting about both these commissions is they were created by the legislature. And so with the Supreme Court's ruling, and some of these rulings, and like I said, we'll discuss a little bit deeper, is that essentially the legislature can create these boards, but then they can't change on how they're appointed. Essentially what they did, so take the Fair Board. They moved back in 2021, they moved a lot of the appointment power away from the governor to appoint over the Fair Board and moved it to the Agricultural Department. And that's significant. And we'll talk about that here in a second of why that's so significant, and has a lot to do with this controversy over the mission statement of the Fair Board, something that was promptly changed as soon as the new Beshear board got in there and made their changes and decisions. So, but when they take these other boards, so take the Ethics Commission, for an example. That commission there is supposed to be overseeing the executive branch. That's the governor, the agriculture commissioner, secretary of state, all these people, and oversee basically ethics complaints to deal with those boards. And priorly, this board was set up in the 90s, and the governor was given the ability to appoint that commission. And this is a lot of, fox watching the hen house, obviously. The Ethics Commission, who's in charge of holding accountable to ethical standards the governor's administration as well as everybody else, probably shouldn't be appointed by the same person they're trying to hold accountable. If the person who can hold them accountable can remove them, then how are they going to hold them accountable? I mean, take our own federal level of checks and balances and all of that. There is, it'd be like saying that, the president is to be held accountable by the judicial system, but but he can fire people on the judges on the judicial system if he just doesn't like them. And of course, that's what he can't do. That the president has no authority outside of appointing the judges, initially being confirmed by the Senate. The president at the federal level has no ability to remove the judges himself. Instead, it has to be led by the legislature. And we see this problem within Kentucky, both in the legislative ethics, we see this with the executive ethics, and we saw this recently with the impeachment effort to do with Judge Julie Goodman, that there's a judicial commission that has in charge of holding that commission, the judicial branch accountable. And all these branches are being appointed by and led by the people who are at the head of those branches. And really, that's not a real check and balance. Instead, in a perfect world, we'd get a little bit of a circular motion here where, the legislature maybe appoints who's over the judicial commission and appoints who's over the executive branch ethics. And I say the legislature because the legislature has far more elected people in it, of course, at the head of it. The legislature has 138 members versus, the executive branch, which I thought had, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the agriculture commissioner, the attorney general, the auditor, the treasurer, and the secretary of state, 7 of them, right? Yeah, I think 7. Anyways, if it's 8, sorry, but 7, I believe. I just went through them and named them. Should be 7. Anyways, 7 of them elected. The lieutenant governor kind of not elected anymore, but kind of elected, still shows up on a ballot. And then, of course, you have over the Supreme Court, you have the chief justices that are also elected that are overseeing that. But those are handfuls of people compared to the legislative branch, which has 138 members. And it's important to understand in our system of government, our legislature is supposed to have far more power than the other two branches because it has so many elected people. This idea of co-equal branches is just false. The executive and the judicial branch are supposed to be subservient to the legislative branch. They're supposed to have the most amount of power. But discussing what's going on with the Fair Board, discussing what's going on with these ethics and these rulings, we'll be talking about that when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Delicious. Oh, what's in here? Oh, well, what's in my tumbler here, the Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler, available for sale. at brewed.store is 1776, a brewed coffee, a Kentucky proud product that's roasted right here in Kentucky, of course. You can pick yourself up a bag at brewed.store. Free shipping on orders over $85. And they're sold in per pound, both ground, whole bean, and K-cups. If you like your little K-cup machines, we have that for you too. And the best part is per pound, it's cheaper than most of the boutique freedom-loving coffees out there. And this one's made right here in your own backyard. I know that's fantastic. So pick yourself up. We've got 1776, a French roasted dark blend, which is historically funny because, of course, the French financed the revolution. And then also we have one of our other signature blends, Tyrant's Tears, a coffee that we meticulously harvest from famous tyrants like Annie Beshear, Pol Pot, and, of course, Mao. Additionally, we have other single origin coffees such as Cameroon Pea Berry, Kenya, Peru. Fantastic, fantastic blends. Go ahead and pick yourself up a bag today. Not only will you be supporting the show, but also you'll be putting in your mouth a delicious and tasty black nectar called coffee. So order yours today. Brewed.store. Once again, it's BREWED.store. Brewed.store. Free shipping. Orders over $85. Pick yourself up a bag and pick yourself up one of these spiffy tumblers. Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler today. Once again, that's brewed.store. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So, the Supreme Court issues a series of rulings recently, as we were discussing, that has to do with commissions and boards. And in their ruling, they stated that the governor has ultimate authority over those. He should be the only one allowed to appoint members to the, of course, Executive Branch Ethics Commission, as well as having control of the Fair Board, that he's the chief executive, so he's supposed to have control over everything. Now, this is a kind of a weird way to look at it because it leaves the question of, well, what is the point of the other elected offices then in the executive branch in the Kentucky state government? If you're saying, okay, well, the executive has to be, so the general thought process here, just to back up, historically, the legislature actually only, like when Kentucky was first put together, only met every other year. And so the idea of the Constitution that they set up within the state was to be heavily led by the executive branch because they were working full-time in the process of running the state. And really, the legislature is only meeting every 2 years to deal with problems, to deal with issues and problems and to address the issues as they be. And they only needed to be called back into session between those 2-year periods by the governor if something needed to be addressed legislatively, emergency, or something like that. And so it is true that our Constitution, our government was set up to be executive heavy, for the executive to have a heavy run. But what the Supreme Court really is ruling into it is that the executive branch apparently isn't 7 other officers, or 6 other officers, lieutenant governor and attorney general and all those. But instead, all the authority of the executive branch really needs to just fall to the governor. And this really reared its head when it comes to the Fair Board. So back in 21, the legislature moved more appointment authority over the Fair Board to the Agriculture Commissioner. Now, why would they do that? Now, some people would say, well, it's because of they just hate the governor and blah, blah, blah. But that's not actually it. See, the State Fair Board and the State Fair as a whole. Now, I know many of us go to it and you walk around the convention center and you see all the different vendors and, people advertising things and you walk around, maybe you get some free swag and you go for the rides or the free concerts or whatever you're going for. The events, you'll see a magician sometimes or performer. I think like last year before, they had like a juggler guy that was really good. And so you go for those things. But a lot of what the state fair is really about and why it's so long, and part of why it's, a week long or however else, what is it, a week long or 2 weeks long, whatever. Anyways, a part of the reason why it's so long is because it is the agricultural competitions that really matter. And there's a lot of pride of course, in that. And whether it's a pumpkin growing contest, or whether it's a cow contest, or, a different horse contests, or different livestock contests. And the way you, of course, get access to this is through your county fair. So the county fairs they have these events, and then if you win those events, you go on to the state level and you can compete there, and different projects and events. And that is the main purpose of the state fair. Like I said, that's the reason why it ever began. It was an agricultural meeting. It actually makes a lot of sense that the agriculture commissioner would be over the state fair, which is at the heart of it an agricultural thing. If you grew up in a small town like I did, those state fairs those county fairs were the places where you went to, and you had your 4-H projects and everything else that you took in there, and it was a chance to compete along those lines. However, the courts ruled that when they made this change, and you could say, well, they made it because of the governor or anything else, but part of the concern was, and this is the concern going forward, was that agriculture was taking a back seat because the Fair Board was overseeing the Kentucky Expo Center. And the Expo Center puts on a lot of different events. It puts on a lot of, whether it be expositions, of course, different trade shows, concerts, those kinds of events, flea markets, gun shows, those kinds of things. And it's expensive, and they put a lot of money into propping up and keeping that Expo Center going. And so because of that, there has been a lot of shift towards kind of like not caring about the agricultural side and caring more about just having as many events and things as possible. And while I understand that is an expensive facility and it has to be paid for, the heart and purpose of the Fair Board was agriculture. And so they put the agriculture commissioner in charge. And that's been going on. But recently here, just within the past few weeks, the Supreme Court ruled that, no, you can't do that. The Fair Board Commission has to be appointed by the governor, because while the agricultural commissioner is a part of the executive branch, apparently he has to also be subservient to the governor, even though he's elected. And I'm saying he because Jonathan Eschell's the commissioner right now. Doesn't make a lot of sense. However, that's what they ruled. And promptly, Beshear puts in place his own board and then fires the current director of the fair, the person who's running the Kentucky State Fair. And let's keep in mind, we are just weeks out from the state fair. And so Beshear gets his ruling, changes up who the commissioners are on the fair board, and then they immediately replace the head of it. Coming up on a fair, you couldn't wait till after. It was so important you needed to replace this guy that you couldn't wait a few weeks for the state fair to be over. So that way you have somebody, because keep in mind, the guy who's been in charge of the fair board is David Beck, and he has been a long time president and CEO of the fair. So he's put on many affairs. And so instead of keeping that guy and just getting through the fair, Beshear's like, no, we got to replace him with Michael Berry, who's the former head of the Kentucky Derby Festival. But this also led to another change, and this dealt with the mission statement. So the mission statement for the State Fair Board stated, this was pre-July 2026, so it literally was changed this month. So before that, it said this. It said the Kentucky State Fair Board shall promote the progress of the Commonwealth of Kentucky and stimulate public interest in the advantages and development of the Commonwealth by providing the Kentucky Exposition Center and the Kentucky International Convention Center as premier facilities for the production of world-class events by producing the Kentucky State Fair and other events of agricultural, educational, commercial, cultural, and civic interest, and by otherwise managing and operating the Kentucky International Convention Center and Kentucky Exposition Center. The new update is the Kentucky State Fair Board shall promote the progress of Kentucky and stimulate public interest in the advantage and development of the Commonwealth by providing the Kentucky Exposition Center and Kentucky International Convention Center for exhibitions, conventions, trade shows, public gatherings, cultural activities, and other functions, and managing these facilities. The Kentucky State Board resolves to advance Kentucky's tourism industry and economy while serving the entertainment, cultural, and educational interests of the public. So you may hear those two and you're like, well, they're not too different other than, of course, the mentioning of tourism and the economy. But they're not too different other than there's one specific word missing, agricultural. And what's interesting is everything in that portion, see, they tacked on something at the end, right? But everything in that portion was untouched other than the removing of the word agricultural, which raised a lot of concerns because, once again, keep in mind, this is like saying the national, I don't know, pick your sport, basketball, high school, KHSAA's basketball tournament, right? Their big state basketball tournament. And let's say their mission, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter what it is. Let's say their mission statement is to put on the best basketball tournament that promotes excellence in the sport of basketball and awards and recognizes those students who are showing exceptional skill in basketball. And then gets rid of the word basketball and says, our mission is to demonstrate athletic abilities of students. And just said that. You'd be like, hey, the entire point of this is basketball. Why is that missing from your mission statement? What, you're going to be focused on the wrong things here. We should be focused on basketball. It's the same thing. The State Fair Board is about agricultural. And agriculture. That is what it's about. Ag. And you're getting rid of ag out of the mission statement sends a pretty clear message that you're so upset that the legislature tried to say, hey, this big ag competition should be run by the ag department. And you're so upset about that when the courts ruled, no, the governor gets say-so over the big ag competition board, you're going to say, well, you know what? This ag competition ain't even going to be about ag anymore because I hate ag so much. That's certainly the way it comes across. And so, once again, a lot of playing politics here going on. I wouldn't be shocked to see if at the end the head ends up being some big donor to Beshear or some other direct connection in that way. That's the kind of thing you hand off as a donor promise. Keep in mind, he tried to grab control of the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife boards and has been trying to get his picks in there as well. He literally, Beshear's run to the courts for control over thing after thing after thing. And the problem with Beshear already running to the courts is, especially in our modern time, we're starting to see a few situations where, Beshear's getting involved in those court elections, which raises a lot of questions about just how, when you get a lot of cases about somebody, how impartial are you going to be if they've raised you thousands of dollars and helped you get elected? We'll have that discussion when we come back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Do you hear that? I do. It's Beshear crying. Why? Because you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And I thought to myself, why should we let those tears go to waste? Like any good capitalist, I said, that is a resource that can be sold. So we capture those tears from Andy Beshear and other famous tyrants like Pol Pot, Mao, whoever else. And we collect them up and we put them into a delicious coffee called Tyrant's Tears, available at brood.store. Once again, that's brood.store. You can pick yourself up a spiffy Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler while you're at it. And get yourself a nice bag. Free shipping on orders over $85. We have Tyrant's Tears in 1776, our signature blends. We also have flavored coffees such as Swiss chocolate and bourbon for those of you that want a little kick without the buzz from, alcohol. You'll get the buzz from the caffeine, though. Check out today. Brewed.store. This is a Kentucky Proud product, roasted right in your own backyard. Brewed.store. Support the show. It's cheaper per pound than most of those other boutique coffees. And it's available whole bean, ground, K-Cups. However you make your coffee, we got you covered. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Speaking of Beshear Fair Board thing real quick, before we dig into some of the perhaps legal, but judicial improprieties, you might say. It just doesn't look good, basically, going on. I want to play this short clip. Beshear was asked about the Fair Board. It's just funny to me. Beshear was asked about changing of the Fair Board mission statement, and this is what he had to say. Take a listen.
We finally say there's something goofy going on in the internet where they say the Fair Board changed its mission and removed agriculture. It's a total lie. I think based on somebody updating a website that we don't even know is connected or not to the Fair Board. The Fair Board met yesterday and took one action and one action alone. So listen, if you want to lie online and spread misinformation, that's on you and shame on you.
So Beshear's response was to say that we don't even know whether or not that website is connected to the Fair Board, and you're spreading misinformation. What are you talking about? First off, factually, the mission statement did change, and we don't even know if that website is connected. What is he talking about? One of two things can be true. Either one, he does know the website's connected, and he does know that the mission statement was changed, and he's lying about it, or Beshear's an idiot. And you can pick which one of the two you want. Because who goes on and talks about, this Fair Board controversy is going on, who goes on and talks about it and doesn't bother to find out whether or not the website that the mission statement, the Fair Board mission statement's on, is connected to the Fair Board or not? What are you talking about? You would know that. You'd go on and say, look, that's not even a state website. We don't know. It's not connected to the Fair Board. We have no say-so over that website. But when you go on, you're like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let's wait till we figure that out. No, you already know it's connected. You're lying about it. And be like, well, and they did one action only. They had nothing to do with changing. I mean, the mission statement didn't even change. It did change. It's like, that is, you look up in the definition, gaslighting, that's what it is. That was gaslighting. But speaking of, though, issues within the courts, we do have, I'll call it like a legal corrupt. There's nothing illegal about it. But definitely some legal corruption going on here, where the Kentucky Supreme Court has, they've had their own issues. We talked about, of course, Justice Pamela Goodwin in 2024. She's running for election. She got a lot of money raised for her. Beshear campaigned for her. Teachers unions raised and spent a lot of money to get her in place. She gets in office and literally they rehear a big case that literally they just heard like weeks ago, months ago, like not that long ago. They heard a case, they ruled on it in an unprecedented manner. They reheard the case again, instead of it being, 4-3, ruling in the favor of the law, saying, and the law had to do with superintendents and had a lot to do with JCPS. Instead of ruling 4-3 in favor of the law, they ruled 4-3 against the law. The only thing that changed was one justice that people who wanted to see that outcome changed heavily campaigned for. But you also have Beshear. For an example, we have Judge Philip Shepard. That was back in, when was that? 22 was that election. Judge Philip Shepard is a Frankfurt court judge, and he hears half, if not more. So anytime there's a lawsuit between Beshear and the legislature, it goes through this same Frankfurt court initially. that's in Frankfurt. So there's some attempts, and depending on who challenges and how they challenge it, could be in another area. But if Beshear files a lawsuit, it gets heard in this one court that has, for some reason, not for some reason, and I know the legislature's tried to make it maybe a lottery system or something, so it's not heard by the same judge every single time. But Judge Philip Shepard's is the initial judge on most of the cases where Beshear is suing the legislature. And so naturally, when that election came up in 2022, Beshear, heavily campaigning, priorly heavy campaign for Judge Shepard, Beshear and his dad had dumped big money into that specific court race historically. So, of course, fighting back, Stivers gets behind another guy. It becomes this very expensive court race. I think like $1 million was spent between both campaigns. Astronomically high amount of money spent on this judge's race. Judge Shepard still wins. But, of course, Beshear heavily supported him in that, directed funding into that. Meanwhile, this guy's hearing those cases. Don't you think that might affect his thought process? And then on top of that, we have Beshear now getting involved with a fundraiser for Court of Appeals Judge Will Monahan, who he appointed to the Court of Appeal, and is now running against Judge Lucy Van Meter. So Judge Lucy Van Meter running for that seat on Court of Appeals. Then the judge that Beshear pointed to it, Beshear's out there attending fundraisers and helping and basically endorsing in order to help him win his election. That's a Court of Appeals. Do you not think that these things end up affecting each other? That the fact he campaigned for him so heavily affects him? We saw what happened with Judge Julie Goodwine, Pamela Goodwine. She had an impeachment filed against her that was dismissed over that. But it's obvious what's going on. Pretty obvious what's going on. But, that's just in our court systems. And these people do get elected. Maybe one day, those of you who vote will feel strong enough to go ahead and get involved and deal with that. We also have here the state auditor has finished an audit of JCPS, found a lot of issues, a lot of problems. We'll just do a quick overview of that. I'm sure my next show, I'll probably dig in a lot deeper on that specific issue. We're just running up on a break here, running up on time for the rest of the show. We have one more segment after this. So probably next week, I'll probably be digging heavily into this audit. But there's one specific overview, one specific item I really want to point out, which had to do with a finding on teachers' pay. And so we will be having that discussion when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here on this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So JCPS had their big audit done by the state auditor. Litany of issues, literally litany of issues. Here's a quick summary for you. They spend too much. They have too many administrators. They pay their administrators too much. Their teachers' pay has not followed what they're spending. We'll talk about that deeper. They have no clear plan. They've always overspent the amount of money they bring in. Their schools are 25% empty. They have a lot of maintenance issues. They focus too much on people's skin color and not enough on learning disabilities when it comes to their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Big shocker there. Of course, they care more about the immutable characteristic of your skin color, something that you're just born with and doesn't inherit unless you're some kind of weird, I don't know, like Hitler-esque eugenicist type person who believes certain skin colors are like smarter than other skin colors, or who believes that, minorities are somehow at a learning disadvantage inherently to white people or something. Unless that's something you believe. A person's skin color per se doesn't really matter. What matters is things like, when it comes to learning, do they have a learning disability? And apparently the schools here, JCPS, according to the audit, is focusing more on skin color, to the point where their funding that deals with kind of the educational and helping people who are historically don't do well in schools to do better in schools is at a risk of being lost. That funding, this is according to the audit, is at risk of being lost because they put so much emphasis on skin color and don't care enough about people with learning disabilities. It's almost like they think that, being born with a mental learning issue or, whether that be, I don't know, dyslexia or, autism or something like that, is not as much of a barrier to your ability to learn as being born black is, which sounds really, really racist to me. According to JCPS, apparently, being born black is worse than being born autistic when it comes to your ability to learn in school. But yet we're the racist ones for pointing out just how crazy and insane they are. But regardless, that's just kind of the overview. Like I said, I'll dig deeper into it. But one point I wanted to talk about here was about teachers' pay. So, and I want to bring this up because, Beshear, teachers unions, all these people that say, oh, these mean Republicans are responsible for our teachers not being paid enough. They say there's a teacher pay issue. And those of you who've listened to my show on a regular basis know that I believe the teacher pay issue is a little more nuanced. I think in some areas, they're probably paid too much. I think we think about teacher pay the wrong way. We value teachers incorrectly, and not just that we undervalue them or overvalue them, but I think it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of nuance there. Those of you who followed me for a long time know kind of how I feel about it. But in general, it doesn't change the fact that the promises have been made by Beshears and teachers unions that they're going to raise their pay, if only it wasn't for the mean old Republicans. But according to this audit, since 2002, so over the last 20 years, because they're looking at 2002 to 2022, 62% inflation-adjusted increase in per-student revenue. So that's inflation-adjusted. So if they were, in 2002 dollars, if they were, easy math here, spending $1,000 a student, which it's far more than that, I would say $10,000 a student. Well, let's just use 10,000 as an example. $10,000 a student in 2002 money, then in 2002 money, they're now spending $16,200 a student. Okay, so that's inflation-adjusted 62% increase. Important to understand. But over those same 20 years, average teacher salaries only rose by 12%. Which is interesting, because if you had that increase in spending, and you're saying, well, we're 62% inflation-adjusted, you would expect to see teacher pay then should also, because you're keeping your ratios the same. If you're literally spending the same amount on teacher salaries in 2002 as you are in 2022, because you're by percentage. Because once again, you're keeping up with inflation. You would see 62% increase, but instead you see 12. I think a lot of teachers probably settle for half that, 31% increase. They'd say, hey, you know what? Okay. Because I saw comments when I talked about this, right? I see all kinds of people making comments, really, truly dumb comments. One was, did you know that the KY legislature is the one that issues raises for teachers? That's something somebody commented, which is a dumb comment. That's not true. The legislature does not set teacher pay. The school boards do. It's like I see people make these comments and they're so incredibly, people commenting, and they're so dumb. So another guy who says he's got a degree in economics saying that, well, when adjusted for inflation, SEEK fundings remain the same. Okay. So you're saying that the state has kept up with inflation with their funding. They're funding them at the same levels in 2002 since they are in 2022. What's the concern here? That was his claim. I don't know if it's kept up with inflation or not, but would say it has. What's the problem here? And he goes, well, because things cost more. Yeah, and it's kept up with inflation. Yeah, but things cost, it's kept up with inflation. Yes, things cost more. Everything costs more than it did in 2002. That's what inflation means. So if you're spending an amount and keeping up with inflation, then you're keeping up with it. And you know what's funny is in inflation, they remove, what do they remove? They remove real estate, I believe. But if we're talking about core inflation, they remove what? Real estate, food, and energy. They remove those three things. They don't remove textbooks and teacher supplies. But yet, keeping up with inflation means it just costs more to do. You could say maybe maintenance costs more than it does inflation-wise, but still we're talking about overall their funding's increased 62%. You think they could cut off a little bit more than 12% for the teachers if they actually cared about it, but that's the thing, they don't care about. It's just like the potholes in the road. They'll always claim, look, we need more money, we need more funding in order to fill those potholes. We need more money, we need more funding in order to pay those teachers more. And if you don't want to give the school more money, then you're mean. But it comes to a point where we just don't have it. Our property taxes are out of control. Huge increases. People are being priced out of their homes. But yet, they need more money. And it's this weird thing where they just turn to the state, like, give them more money. They're not getting enough money. One, there's no proof that even raises outcomes. But two, where are they going to get the money from? Over half the state budget goes to education. So where are they going to get the money from? You don't want them to cut anything, but give more money to education. What you're saying is, well, I want to tax people more. They're like, well, just tax the rich more. Wait, you think the rich have it? You think they have enough money to feed your endless beast? Absolutely ridiculous. But as I said, next episode, we'll be digging more into that audit. But y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank y'all so much for joining me. Hey, once again, happy 250. Hopefully you guys had a great weekend celebrating. I know I did. Make sure to, if you're listening, once again, Facebook, social media, like, comment, share, subscribe. If you're listening to the podcast version, make sure you leave a review. Only 5 stars, though. That's all we take there. Make sure you're telling other people about it, telling them to tune in. Otherwise, thank you all so much. We'll see you back here next week.